Super chess against Fugagashimov, I think that's the one that stood out, where Vishy Anand and Jordan van Forees with the black pieces just shot things down, made draws. It almost backfired, but worked out in the end. These two players have the black pieces again today, so we'll see if we can understand as we go through the opening moves what the strategy is. Oh my goodness, David. We already see a big surprise on board 3. I'm actually in shock. Let's jump in there.
I'm in total shock as well. We will come, of course, to this game between Magnus Carlsen and Richard Rapport, one of the heavyweight clashes of the roundup of this match of the opening phase.
Absolutely. Let's go to board 1, Rapport against Magnus. This one is one you talked about, match strategy. I'm very curious. We saw Super Chess sometimes keeping it very solid with black. Magnus is on 100%. Do you think Rapport might have been instructed to play very solidly as white today?
I think that would have been good strategy. This is the only board that Offerspiel outrate their opponents. Everywhere else, Super Chess are quite significant favourites, or at least will kind of fancy themselves. So it would make sense to try and shut this game down, but luckily we're getting a full-blooded fight. Let's just go back to the start. We've had 8 moves here. It was a Sicilian defense, a sign that Magnus isn't happy to just keep things solid, keep things really kind of slow. He's basically saying to Richard that there's no way to force a draw against me here, and Richard says, okay, I'll play a quieter line, bishop to b5. This seems to be debated in a bunch of top-level games in every single tournament these days. G6, Magnus's repertoire here from the 2018 World Championship against Caruana. And after e5, we see an exchange, and white really slow playing it here, slightly ruining the black pawn structure, but at the cost of the bishop pair. White's knight might come out to c4. White will most likely play on the queen side maybe later on. But black is known to be very solid here.
What are some of the black plans?
Yeah, there's a few ways to set up as far as I know. I'm not a huge expert here. This black knight can be developed in a few ways. You can bring it to f6 and back to d7. If it sits on f6, it blocks the defense of the e5 pawn for a while. So there's also ways to develop it by pushing a pawn to f6 instead and bringing the knight back around from h6 to f7. Yeah, first you can start with moves like pawn to b6. You're really, really flexible here. And white pretty much, especially with the rook on e1, white only has one pawn break. So here Rapport's been showing his hand. He really wants to play moves like a3, b4 in the near future. Just for example, we could see a variation such as this one. It looks like a pawn sacrifice, just trying to undermine black on this side. It looks counterintuitive because you're helping black undouble the pawns, but Magnus could not get greedy here, or should not get greedy, because his queen will get kicked around, and for example, white's knight could come in, and this already looks pretty scary.
Yeah, with the king also stranded in the center. So that not a pawn that Magnus will want to take. If we just rewind to that position just a couple of moves ago, if you don't take the pawn a second time, has this exchange, how has it affected the game?
Yeah, essentially you're fighting for the dark squares. As white, you have a very simple plan, for example, of bringing your knight forward and bishop maybe to e3, just putting some pressure on this a7 pawn with your bishop, with your rook. It's not much, of course, here. Black's just really, really solid. But this is the kind of route I think the game might take. Yeah, right now, Magnus just deciding how to develop this knight. The other way would be kind of the slow way, knight round to f6, then back to d7, then back to f8, then into e6, where it controls some nice squares. But it takes a long, long time, of course.
I wonder, is Magnus looking at that Deac game? I doubt it, because from what we can see, not too much has actually happened there. I think Arjan was away from the board for a moment. We'll get to that soon, but for now, let's first go to board 2. Raunak Sadwani.
At least look a bit too ambitious. So right now, key moment.
I'm very excited about not just this game, but this whole matchup. I felt yesterday the top 2 matches were very quiet in the first hour or two. But here, it looks like action is pretty much on every board.
Yeah. Especially board 3, with one a3 being played. Okay, should we put a pause on this one for now, Fiona?
Let's do it. We're going to go to what is board 1, but should actually be board 2. So the clash between Novi Bor, the defending champions, and Fugagashimov. If they want to have any chance, I don't actually, now I should probably have asked this before we went live. Do you know what the first tiebreak is? Is it? I'm sure Sotiris will enlighten us very shortly, because it makes a big difference. Is it just board points? Is it direct encounter?
I believe it's a form of Buchholz, but to do with board points. I'm not entirely sure. We'll need to get that verified. But all I know is that between these two leading teams, actually, Offerspiel and Super.
Speaking to Magnus before the game at the beach, of course, and I mean, from what he said, he wasn't, I mean, like super optimistic. He thought maybe Richard would try to force a draw almost, or it will be very difficult to beat a player of Richard's caliber with the black pieces. But to my eyes, it seems like Magnus got a fighting position, and I mean, there is also some imbalances, so I don't see why this should just be a draw. And obviously he's got to play very well to break down Richard, but I think this is a very good start, at least a nice opening, and he's also built up some time advantage, which is usually a pretty good sign for Magnus.
That's true, up on the clock by 20 minutes now, and it looks roughly balanced. Whose position would you prefer?
To my eyes, I think black. I would prefer black, actually.
Because it's Magnus? Or?
Yeah, a bit because it's Magnus, and I also know he plays these openings so well, on like these type of positions. But it's also a bit difficult to find any pawn breaks for white here. And if you don't have a natural pawn break, I at least find it pretty difficult to play. So, okay, play a4, so he's probably planning to grab some space on the queen side, but black will probably play a5 and just shut it down, and then it's all about if black can be able to play f5 or g5 at some point and just break open the position and try to attack Richard's king. So I'm actually quite optimistic in this position.
So you think a lot of maneuvering, long grind, and eventually maybe a pawn break?
Yeah, that's what I would think. Otherwise, if a pawn break isn't able to go through, then it's probably not much to do, yeah?
Yeah.
So it's all about these pawn breaks, f5, g5, or something like that.
Okay, but first your prediction on the board. Black just locks down the queen side, very logical. Probably put a pawn on b6. Where do you think the black king is going to go?
I think it's probably going to wait a bit, or pretty soon he might have to decide anyhow, yeah? Because if he goes to the king side, then playing f5 and g5 will probably be more risky for your own king safety. But if you go long castle, then white might just start immediately to try and go for c3 and b4 and break open the position. Although, I mean, it's maybe you need to do some preparation protecting the b pawn. Yeah, but I think he will eventually castle long. If he wants to win, at least.
Yeah, definitely. Feels like the perfect position for a team tournament as well. You kind of just sit and slowly maneuver and wait, and just before move 40, or maybe even after move 40, when things are a bit more clarified with the team results, then you decide how hard to push and how many risks to take.
And also Richard yesterday had a pretty bad position against MVL and had to suffer a lot. So, I mean, if he again, and now with the white pieces, is in some slight, I wouldn't say trouble yet, but if he doesn't, it might turn into a position that's very difficult to play, yeah?
Yeah, and just while this game is still going, because
We are back, and as you could see there on your screens, it looks like the game between Magnus and Rapport, where we actually left off, maybe ended in a draw. They haven't gotten up yet. Maybe the arbiter is checking. Did they repeat moves?
yeah, it wasn't move 30 quite yet, Fiona, and there is a no draw before move 30 rule in place, but repetitions are the exceptions, and
I think we're going to be just in time to see the handshake.
yeah, it looks like a claim by Magnus Carlsen. Rapport has just played the last move, queen to e3. So after Magnus, I believe, plays the move queen c7, that would be the third time we see that position. And look at that, we a bit blocked there, but we did see Ivan Sokolov poke his head over.
Please tell me that's not an arbiter.
That's definitely an arbiter. We love them.
We saw the handshake just before the arbiter stepped in. And
because Magnus was slightly afraid of the opponent's plans and unable to come up with his own productive ideas. And a smile from Magnus Carlsen as well. A fair result in the end. I'm slightly surprised he didn't keep the tension, tried to keep things going in light of the fact a couple of his teammates might be suffering. But yeah, let's just show why this game did end in a draw. And it was actually just a couple of moves after we left it. Let's just backtrack. It was in this position that we thought, okay, it's blocked. I started coughing and we had to move off this game, but Simply white dropped the knight back to d2, and maybe just the idea, or at least the ghost of pawn to f4, was enough to scare Magnus. He moved his queen to c7, indirectly covering this square, but this allowed a hit on the f6 pawn. Only one way to guard this. Magnus's queen came back, white sidestepped again, hinting at pawn to f4, a break in the center, and the dance between queens continued.
I am very curious that the evaluation bar seems to be a tiniest bit in black's corner. If we turn on the engine lines, which we normally don't do, what does the engine say?
Yeah, it says that actually you can allow white to go for this break. For example, if you make a useful waiting move, let's say, for example, rook to e8, centralizing. If white does push forward with f4, then after a trade of pawns, black is actually pretty happy here. For example, you can attack this pawn, and if white defends it, suddenly...
This game is not good for you,
This
David.
game is not good for me. There's a curse on this game for sure. But knight to d4. Actually, it's black who's doing quite well due to the fact you're attacking this backward pawn. If white actually ever steps forward, there might be tricks in the air, such as knight to f5. I mean, this is not easy to see from afar, of course. And if white sidesteps, then the black knight might even reroute into a beautiful outpost on g4. And actually here, the looseness of white's center is quite telling. And if anyone's king is safer, it's black's. I'm very surprised that Magnus did agree to the draw. Of course, white doesn't need to push f4. I don't think Rapport would have done so. But yeah, it definitely would have been possible to keep this game going for a while.
As you mentioned, maybe some of the other players under a little bit of pressure. So the top two games in this match ended in draws. Let's move to board.
Well, I was a bit surprised by the opening. So I mean, I didn't want to play e5 stuff in case he wanted to just force a draw. So I thought, yeah, h4 he played quickly, but it didn't seem very good to me. So that was the surprise. But I mean, I played this position once against as white against Dubov. Like usually they're very, very slow. But as I discussed with him after the game briefly, like here I played h5, which is stupid. Like he, I don't know what he said that he'd missed knight b6. It was a bit strange because h4 was played. Maybe he was mixing something up or something. But he just felt that here. I mean, he said like he felt that he was screwed, but which seems excessive. But clearly, I should have done something like this instead. I think just because after h5, there's f5. Yeah, okay. Now the bar doesn't know what to say about it. Even I don't have to go f5. I can just go like castles instead. So h5 was just, I don't know what I was thinking. I thought like I'm gonna be very, very solid, but it was a bit unnecessary. I mean, in the subsequent play, I think he could be slightly better, but it isn't really much at all. And he said like he'd missed bishop h6 as well, which just I think takes away like any remaining chances he might have. I mean, I could have even traded on c4 first, because these structures, I think I bring the knight around after trading the bishop, and you know, there's nothing much for white to do. Like he does control the only pawn break really, but I'm also like, he also has to look out for g5 at some point. So I think there was nothing much there, but I was getting like very, very slightly ambitious here. But I think in terms of like being safe for white here, he actually found a nice plan with putting the rook to g2 and then h2, and then I don't think a lot can go wrong. Like I was looking at ways to try and push g5, but I didn't really see it. I was hoping he was going to be ambitious with some c3 or something, but yeah, I don't think there was anything. And here, yeah, I was again looking at g5, but it didn't look good, so I thought queen c7, let me just invite the repetition, which I was pretty sure that he was going to take, because I think like here, playing for a win for him would only be risking getting worse. For instance, if, for instance, if he'd gone rook to f1, hinting at f4, then probably rook e8, and I think f4 would already be a bit of a mistake here. So I'm bringing the knight around, and then probably to here as well. So yeah, and now the bar is dropping a bit as well. So it seems that only black is better in such a situation, and if you cannot play f4, then there's nothing much you can do. Like c3 is never realistic, and I also have my own stuff. So
were you tempted at all to keep the game going? You mentioned that you were.
Yeah, but I just didn't really see it. Like,
Okay.
I mean, I thought I don't really have any plans, so yeah, I thought that it's just a draw.
Was your decision to take the draw to repeat influenced by the other games that are still ongoing?
Yeah, a little bit. I thought I mean, there was a slight misevaluation there, I have to say, because I thought when I decided to make the draw, I thought Frode's position was good. Now I'm not so sure anymore. Maybe I thought that that Arjen's position was a bit more solid than I was, but Pranav is